Everyone, welcome back to the Star Wars News Net's Timeline Show. Brian, we are still camping out here in the year 382 BBY, a place that our audience will grow very familiar with over the next few weeks, because apparently in that span of the timeline, there were so many things that decided to happen all at once. Just like much of the High Republic, it's
most
kind of
of phase
how much
two,
it just packs into this one year. But tonight we are talking about what I think we're both titling one of our favorite novels in all of Star Wars for me personally.
Pretty close, yeah.
Convergence by Zoraida Cordova. This took place in 382 BBY. This was the first adult novel of the High Republic Phase 2 initiative. It came right after Path of the Seat, which was the middle grade novel. This came out November of 2022, which kind of blows my mind that was feels like so long ago at this point. It's kind of really incredible that it's been, we're going full circle on this at this point. So, Brian, initial thoughts on Convergence are, this really is the essence of Star Wars. I think that Zoraida Cordova took all of the things that make Star Wars so great, which is that persisting hope through the really dark times. And while that's a beat that feels like it may be just almost getting tired of at this point, she does it in a way where it has a really fresh and rejuvenating take. And she does it through these two pairs of would-be lovers and really connects them all together on this very harrowing journey that has a lot of heavy lifting on the world building side. Right. And honestly, it's really hard for me to say which is my favorite High Republic novel. And I have to say, I think that Convergence and Cataclysm, while the era of Phase 1 is my favorite era of Phase 1, those two novels might be my two favorite novels in all of the High Republic, these next two adult novels we're talking about. So real quick, where does Convergence kind of rank for you just in terms of High Republic novels? And then maybe we can talk just a general ranking in all of Star Wars novels before we dive into kind of the story beats.
So as far as High Republic goes, they're up there on the list. I mean, there's not, there's what, a dozen novels, something like that for High Republic total so far. For High Republic,
more at this point, honestly.
maybe, for High Republic, they're like my numbers 3 and 4. They're right back to back. I still love The Fallen Star. That's still my number 1 High Republic novel. And then Light of the Jedi is right behind it. Yeah. I love The Fallen Star. I loved it.
I cannot wait to talk to you about that one in a few weeks or I guess in a couple months, because that is probably my least. That's probably my least. It's probably my least. Is it really?
It was. I loved it so much
more than Path of Vengeance, but we'll definitely have a lot to talk about.
Oh yeah, but as far as I think they were two solid. I think those two were two very solid novels for Phase 2 of this High Republic initiative. And, we were talking before we started recording, you can read them back to back and it's one continuous, story beat for beat. And so, we'll talk about the other one, when we get to it. But for Convergence, I thought it was a great way to start this High Republic, because this is what I read. Did I read this first? I think I read this before I did anything else.
You read this one before Path of the Seat.
Yes. And so this was my first introduction to Phase 2 of High Republic, and I loved it. It's like you were saying, it feels like Star Wars. This book actually feels like Star Wars. It reintroduces some elements that we really like through a couple of characters that are just really what's the word I'm looking for? Not lovable, but what's the word I'm looking for? Compelling. They're compelling characters. The whole story of Iram and Irono. I'm sorry.
I heard Charles Soule, he called it Arano.
Arano? Okay,
I don't know. I don't know if that's the official lingo for it, but that's how he said it in his panel last weekend. So I was like, if Charles Soule is going to say Arano, then I guess
we'll say it that way.
Arano. He didn't write this book, but that's just what I'm calling it.
Fair enough. Well, he sits in enough meetings where they talk about these planets where, but the whole conflict between the two planets and, the deep history in the what's the word I'm looking for? The grudges they each hold, the resentment between the two planets,
Mhm.
and everything. You can really feel it, and you kind of understand both sides of this war. But when you get these two characters together, both trying to come up with a peace plan for their planets, it's
Right.
awesome. They weave the politics in so beautifully. It's done. I thought it was done great. The pacing was great all the way through. I never found myself bored in this book at all. I
Oh,
loved
this
it all the way through.
start to
Um,
finish, it's
yeah, it's so good.
wastes no time. But in a very different way than Light of the Jedi might have started, which launches
Right.
you Light of the Jedi, the very first High Republic book, which we'll talk about later, launches you straight into a galactic altering event. This one isn't quite galactic altering, but this is basically begins with a forever war that's been launched between Aram and Arano, two really like sister planets that are existing, right next to each other. There's like this desolate moon in between the two of them. And they've just been locked in this, what they're calling the Forever War in Star Wars, where Aram is this planet that has, a ton of saltwater, oceans around it. And you have Arano, which is more like a desert planet. So
Yeah.
both planets are pretty scarce in terms of resources. And since they are no longer able to, depend on each other for any support, they've been locked in this war. Both planets are really starving. They're hurting for resources. So Aram calls on the Republic for aid. And when we pick up in this book is in the middle of a very cautious ceasefire between the two planets. And
Mhm.
Ziri, who I am so excited to talk about, she is the heir to the quote unquote throne of Arano. And then ultimately, the lover that she meets, we'll talk about later on, is Fontu from Aram. And he is the
Mhm.
prince of Aram. And it's through these two heirs that really the story really takes hold. And if you disagree, let me know. But to me, those two are the heart of the two adult novels for
Oh,
Phase 2 of
absolutely.
the High Republic. They
Oh,
are
yeah.
the
Yeah.
beating heart and soul of these books. And there is in both their relationship and Gela and Axel's relationship. And we've talked about Axel on here before, and we've
Mhm.
mentioned briefly Gela and Natai. But in those two would-be lover pairs, there is just so much interlacing, interweaving of you can see the Han Leia, you can see the Anakin Padme, you can even see
Yeah.
like the Rey Ben, like you can see those little romantic arcs. And I would say Cordova blends them all in a way that is so captivating
Mhm.
because you are not fooling yourselves into being naive that these are all going to work out perfectly, but you also are 100% all in, beaming with hope and really hoping that this all turns out for the best. And she almost kind of tries to work you into this. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay, right? Like it's going to be okay,
Yeah.
right? And so it's in this middle of the ceasefire. And as Star Wars always is, there's a group that actually wants to help, establish a lasting peace. And there's a group that we're going to talk about, the Path of the Open Hand, that is looking to stir the flame, kind of get this going, stir the pot a little bit, stoke the flames of war, and really expand this conflict and drag even more systems into it. So, real quick, we have Ziri Fontu. Ziri is the heir to Arano, and then we have Fontu, who is the heir to Iram, and then we have Igela Natai, our main Jedi of Phase 2, and then we have, if you see there, Brian was able to pull some art from ArtStation.com. They did like a AI kind of live action rendering of
Mhm.
what these characters might look like. Was kind of unique, and I'm gonna flip over to this thumbnail real quick
Yeah, go
because
for it.
Igela Natai. I don't know if you guys agree. For those of you on YouTube watching, looks kind of like Zoraida Cordova. Like, I don't know if that was intentional, but I'm like we have Zoraida Cordova there. Galatai, I don't know. It looks I don't know. It just looks it looks like
It
it
looks
was almost
intentional.
inspired from her, right?
Yeah.
And so we have Galatai and Axel Greylark, another very strange would-be kind of lover couple that's very different vibes from Ziri and Fontu. And before we dive just into the dynamics of their relationships and why those relationships are so important, which team are you on? Are you team Axel Gela or are you team Fontu and Ziri?
Oh, Fontu and Ziri. All the way. I
100%.
love those two. Yeah. I absolutely adore those two. I couldn't find any concept art. I couldn't find the concept art of them
Right.
for this episode. But like I was telling you beforehand, well, for those of you that don't know, I'm a huge Assassin's Creed fan. That's one of my favorite video game franchises of all time. And as I was reading this book, that's another thing this book does is it's so descriptive. You can picture that it's written so well that you can see this. And so I always pictured her as Elise from Assassin's Creed Unity, which is
Yes.
red hair, green dress, and that's what I just always pictured her as. And then when I saw the concept art, I'm like, spot on. That's exactly what I was picturing. So I love those two all the way. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I love the dynamic of Axel and Natalie.
Right.
But I just Natai, I don't know.
There's no wrong answer. Like, there's no wrong answer.
Yeah,
They're both fantastic. I would lean the same way.
They seemed so strained, and it's almost
as
like
individual characters, I would lean more Gilla and Axel, but as a pair and just thinking of the two of them together, then I agree. I agree.
Yes.
Part of that's because it's almost like the relationships in Star Wars that are kind of those doomed relationships from the start almost never work out ever.
Yeah.
And here, like at the end of this book, there is hope each time. Like we see some hope, bursting through each of these novels that gives you some hope that, this might work out just fine. And so let's pick up the story. So the ceasefire happens. And immediately everything, kind of goes to hell with the ceasefire. And Ziri ends up trying to stop any further commotion that goes on while she's piloting her squadron. But she ends up crash landing on Aram. And here we have Fontu, the prince of the planet that's at war. And he has never met Ziri. The two planets, there are people on these planets that all they know is they have grown up knowing they need to hate the other side. Right. And so he would think you'd see this fighter pilot falling from the sky. I would assume, I believe in the book, knows it's not necessarily an Aram fighter pilot. And what's his first instinct? It is to go and help and
rush out and save him.
And Ziri, of course, her first instinct, she is the warrior of the relationship. Her first instinct is to stick a knife to his throat as soon as they are encountered. And the thing about Ziri, and I wrote this down, like, our guy, Kyle, who used to write a lot of reviews for us on the site, he reviewed this book, and I really loved the way that he put this, so I wrote it down. He was talking about Ziri as the warrior. He said that she fights with the ferocity of a warrior, ready to defend her world, but also with the desperation of someone trying to preserve it, someone looking for a new way. She's fighting because she feels like it's a necessity, but she's also wanting a way out. And so these two are actually being able to have a dialogue for the first time. And they realize that both of them want the same thing. They want the fighting to end. They want their planets to prosper. And through the kind of, I guess, mitigation of Chancellor Molo, if you want to put his concept art back up here, he is looking to make a name for himself here on the Outer Rim. So he wants to negotiate like a peace treaty between the two planets, and they choose kind of the moon that's kind of right in the center of the two planets is like this neutral ground where they're going to host it. And Chancellor Greylark, she can't make it. She's on Coruscant. She sends her son Axel, who we've talked about before, the prince of, Coruscant, the Lando Calrissian charmed mixed with Han Solo of High Republic. He goes in her stead. Now, he, at this point, the last time we talked about him, he was kind of looking optimistic. He was looking on like for a bright future. But since that time, his father has died, and we don't know a lot about that at this point. And we see him kind of in the backwaters of Coruscant, kind of gambling his fortune away, but also trying to win it back at the same time. So this was your first introduction to Axel, along with mine, everyone's first introduction, unless you started with Tales of Light and Life. When you first met Axel, and his mother has to bribe him with the rest of his inheritance to even get him to go to, the moon. What are your first impressions of him?
I knew he was going to be an issue. I just, because I had not, read the Queen's Bloom. I hadn't read it yet at this point.
Right.
And so I had a feeling he was going to end up being this wild card. And this whole, like, she was sending him. That is the worst representative you could have picked to send in your stead for this, massive peace treaty for these two planets. That is the worst person you could have picked.
But also the best at the same time.
At the same time. Yeah, you're not wrong. But with his mentality, I knew that shenanigans were going to ensue, and I don't know. This was the first experience I had of him, and I kind of understood a little bit with him talking about his father's death and stuff. My dad died in 2012. He was taken from me, and so it was something I could relate to with the character a little bit, and I kind of understood the bitterness a little bit towards the Jedi and the distrust. But yeah, him coming into it, I remember thinking, like, you are the chancellor. That was my initial thought. You are the chancellor, one of the chancellors of the Galactic Republic, and you're sending your son, who is a gambler and a drunkard. Like, can you imagine, right? Like, if, like, and I don't want to get political here, so nobody lynch me. I'm not trying to name drop anybody but can you imagine if, like, our president sent his son to, like, negotiate something somewhere and the guy was just a mess? Like, can you imagine, like, the fallout from that?
Right.
Especially something as sensitive as this Forever War going on. It just, it was, to me, it was like, oh man, this isn't, that was my first thought. This isn't going to go well. He shouldn't be there. And then when he shows up to everybody, he just pops in out of nowhere. Like, nobody even knew he was coming. He's just like, hey guys. They're like,
well, that's what makes him, because he shows up, and Gela is the Jedi that he's really taken by, and Gela is really taken by him. The two are basically paired up throughout this entire book, and you have Gela and Axel both have been through intense emotional trauma, and they wear that kind of armor, that these facades and these armors that they've put over themselves, and they wear it so strongly. Axel's facade is the, puffed up party boy that does not give a flip about anyone, like, in the smugness and even the carefree nature. And it's all a facade because of his own emotional insecurity, the emotional trauma. And for Gela, she's never been confronted with something like this. And her whole life has been the order. And it's almost been a shield for her to avoid opening herself up to other possibilities and other ways of life, so to speak. Not that she was like discriminatory against other ways of life, but it was more of the dogma, the doctrine. And she wore that like armor. And the two of them really opened each other's eyes to something different that they had never experienced before. And watching them almost intentionally try to get under the other skin in a way that is actually endearing because they're charmed by the other person as well is really fascinating. And so they all get paired up on this moon. Gela agrees to be one of the Jedi that is going to kind of oversee a lot of what we see here. But we're also introduced to some other Jedi here in phase 2, and that's Creighton's son and Innikin. Now, Creighton's son is my favorite, quote unquote, adult Jedi of the phase 2. He is described as being like kind of a bit cynical, but has a great sense of humor for those that kind of get to know him. And then you have Innikin, who's the Padawan of, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, I don't know how to say it. I was always horrible with names. It's like Charreal Roy.
Charreal Roy, I think is how you say it.
Charreal Roy. It's such a hard name. Okay, so for those that are, listening, it's CHAR-RYL-OROY. And so
I don't know what it is with their species coming up with these names. They're like Kiadi Mundi. Like, who comes up with these triple hyphenated names?
I'm telling you that these people were smoking the same stuff that George was smoking when he came up with that name. 100% called George up and like, okay, what did you hit right before you came up with these like Massian or whatever their species' names? And it's even one of those things where it's hard for me to read in my head.
Same.
Normally you just attach whatever you want to these things.
Because there's no shortened version of it anywhere. Whenever they say his name, it's the whole name. They never once shorten it for anything. And every time I hit it, I'm just like, oh.
Every time I hit, I'm like Charlie Roy. That's kind of what I said. Like, Charlie Roy. Over here with Charlie Roy. And I don't even know why I went there with the accent or anything. That's literally how I read his name.
I have no idea how to say that name.
And so Inya is his Padawan. Inya's highly skilled. Charl, we're going to call him Char. Char and Creighton are really good friends. They're very close friends. And kind of like I would say the way that it's hard to really describe. There's not a lot of just brothers that you see in the
Right.
prequel Jedi. If imagine it like who's the closest like brother kind of brother I guess that we see in Star Wars. I know that Mace and Dooku were somewhat close, but even
When
though
they were
they
younger,
like when they
yeah.
were younger a little bit, I know Qui-Gon kind of had a really brother-like relationship with Dooku's former Padawan,
Right.
with her master, like those, but it's hard to describe because the order
Yeah.
is so different in the
'Cause
prequel,
it's
but
not on the same level as, like, an Obi-Wan Anakin.
'cause
It's
they
nowhere near
yeah.
that. It's nowhere near that kind of level, but it's
And well, the dynamics are completely different too, because it's
right,
not like any one
right,
of them was ever, a subordinate to the other.
right, right,
So they're all matched up together, and the path of the open hand is trying to continue this war. They want the ceasefire to end. They want the treaty talks to end. And so there are assassination attempts. There's attempts to disrupt these proceedings. And ultimately, what's decided between Ziri and Fontu, they decided there's only one way that we can actually try to create a lasting union between our two planets, and that's for them to join in union themselves. And so the two heirs, Ziri and Pontu, they decide that they are going to get engaged and they're going to be married and hope that if the two heirs from the planets can come together, that it can symbolize a true unity between the planets and end the war. And as a way of ending, making sure that this is known, they actually go on this mission of
tour,
good faith in this
yeah,
tour of Arano first to really like the back like farms out in the middle of nowhere of
settlements,
Arano.
villages, yeah,
Mhm. And these villages have no idea that this has happened. This is news that's traveling very slowly because it's a very rural, different rural cities. They've lived their entire lives, never even probably seeing someone from Aram, only knowing that we're at war with them, we hate them, they need to die. And all of a sudden, you have the heir of your planet coming in and saying, "Oh yeah, we're getting married. The war is over, and you guys got to chill now." Probably not going to go over so well. All of this while we know that Axel is being grilled by the mother and other members of the Path of the Open Hand to do what he can to stop these proceedings from happening and
right,
stoke the fires of war some more. So they're going on this tour. There's lots of attempts. We could talk for hours about the different things that happen, but that middle section is just really fun because we're seeing it's really just the four of them, and there's just a lot of world building between Iram and Arano, and just a lot of character building just through those four, because we're really with those four most of the time. What was like your favorite part of the dynamics? Is they're each saving each other's lives. They're learning more and more about each other.
hmm
And Ziri and Fontu go from just these two people that have some beginning mutual respect for one another to actually starting to form a serious relationship
right,
through the stress that they're under, and actually seeing, oh, we actually have a lot in common. We just
hmm
approach it from two very different ways. So what are
right.
your thoughts on kind of just that middle package of the book?
Right. No, I think it felt like a very natural progression for these two people from two completely different worlds. I mean, complete opposite ends of the spectrum, biome wise, and different cultures. To, I mean, they decide to get married before they even really know anything about each other at
Right.
all. And they're doing it for their people, not so much for themselves. And as they naturally grow closer and closer for this, uh, I call it a USO tour, basically. Them going from place to place and campaigning, basically saying this is what we're doing.
Right.
Um, I think at first, it was really just put on the smile, just smile and wave, and that kind of attitude. But the more they grew closer and closer, the more I think the people they were talking to could see it also. They did a really good job of convincing people
Right.
on the planet, and they did an amazing job. And um we can talk about how that came to an end here in just a little bit, but I also really liked the dynamic of Natai and Axel, and how they started, like you were saying earlier, getting under each other's skins a little bit, and how
Mhm.
she started to understand him a little bit more, and whatnot. So um no, I just when my favorite part of that whole middle package is when like that climax happens on that tour. We can talk about here in a minute when all hell breaks loose. I absolutely love that whole sequence. And if I remember right, we can talk about it here in a minute. But if I remember right, didn't one of them get injured?
Yes, they did. I'll be honest. I
remember
don't
right.
remember.
I don't remember who it was.
I want to say, so I know that, so Axel gets bit by this poisonous scorpion later on in the book. It's towards the end. It's towards the beginning of the like third act of the book. It's towards the end. But that whole middle package is basically you have Axel and Gela keeping each other alive while Gela's trying to keep Fontu and Ziri alive, but really Ziri and Fontu are having to keep each other alive as well. And you're really getting into those dynamics, and they have different ways of approaching it. And the way that Zoraida Cordova really paints it is kind of like Fontu. He is more of the negotiator. He's more of like, let's talk about this. Let's use our words. He's almost an idealist in a lot of respects. And Ziri, who's been on the front lines of this war, understands what the people on the front lines are feeling and thinking, and is a little bit more of a realist and kind of is more blunt and just says things how they are, while Fontu wants to see the idealistic side of things. But what actually makes that work is because you have two planets that are coming together, and you're going to need someone that can hold on to what we could be, what things could be, while Ziri, who's not ignoring that, but she is saying, well, these are what things are right now, and we have to address this first.
Deal with it,
And they come together in just a beautiful way that you just want to like take these two and you want to lock them in a room, keep them safe,
protect
don't
them,
let any like thing, happen to them, because every time in Star Wars we get these like relationships, and I just kept waiting for one of them to die or one of them to get axed or something. But thankfully that never happens in Convergence. And they actually, if we want to skip forward a little bit, they actually get married, and the wedding is just as bonkers as you would think when you have two planets that are trying to stop being at war. You have a splinter group of this cult called the Path of the Open Hand, and the mother who's trying her best to
keep the war going,
get the war to continue going because of the resources they're hoping to gain out of it, the wealth they're hoping to acquire from it, and also just kind of keep, influencing the Jedi, keeping the Jedi at bay. And here you have, Ziri and Fontu hell-bent on getting married. And so, Brian, do you remember the bounty hunters and everything that happens at the wedding?
Remember that? It's a wild wedding. It's just, they're in there trying to do their own thing, and then all hell breaks loose outside. And in my mind, all I could think of was, them getting ready to basically say I do, and they're looking at the door like, can we speed this up a little bit? Like, can we just hurry this up and get it done? And then as soon as it's over, they're out the door, like, and
they're fighting for their lives.
And they're fighting, and it was an awesome scene, and like even with everything going on outside, and it was brutal too, and with everything going on, they were still, let's do this. We got to do it right now. And don't worry about the pomp and the circumstance. Just do it right now. They were trying to
stop the wedding, and they're saying, no, we're going to finish this off. And this is right after Fontu and Axel discovered the secret medical facility where the Queen of Aram had been developing this deadly poison that they were going to unleash on Arano and use this like bioweapon against them as well. And Axel knew about the poison. He was sent there to retrieve some vials of it for the mother and for everyone. And he ended up retrieving the vials, but instead of handing them over to the Path of the Open Hand, he could not get Gela Natai's messages to him about, what he could be. And he hadn't heard, in reading Tales of Light and Life, she kind of instills in him a little bit of the voice of his father that he had been missing. And he's so far gone at this point that it doesn't just completely snap him out of it, but he is to the point where he at least doesn't send forth the transmission. Now, he's done a lot of things in this book that he would go away and spend some time in. And he does get arrested at the end of the book and have to go off to prison. But part of that was by choice to some degree. He didn't, just submit himself for prison, but he did decide not to retrieve the vials. He was going to destroy the vials. Now, he did play a large hand in the, main city of Aram flooding and nearly killing everyone. But I am an Axel believer, and I choose to believe that, you know what, we're going to look at this one little thing that he tried to do right, and we're going to wipe away all of his other sins and forgive him because that's what we do for Axel Greylark.
I'm not.
And so you mentioned the bounty hunters. We mentioned the first scene, and basically the Jedi discover that the audience is not tourists here to see the wedding. They're not
Yeah.
people that have been invited to the wedding. They're all bounty hunters here to, you know, either they're here to stop the wedding, they're here to find Axel, they're here to cause mayhem. And the Jedi are like, oh my gosh, we're suddenly
We didn't even know where to
defending
start. Yeah.
hundreds of bounty hunters. And so as soon as they discover the one, all of a sudden blasters are everywhere, and the Jedi are just absolutely on their heels.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to defend both. You have one of the chancellors there, you have the citizens there, and of course you have Ziri and Fontu who are getting married. Where does that rank for you? That whole sequence, where does it rank for you in terms of like action sequences that we have in some of the High Republic novels?
I love that scene. I put that entire scene on par with some of the chaos we saw in the Battle of Jeddah.
Really?
I do. I sat and listened to Battle of Jeddah. That was like a 5.5-hour audio drama. I listened to that entire thing while I was at work in the car driving around town one day. Like
Battle of Jeddah is good. I like the Valo Republic Fair battle more.
Yeah, on Valo, I agree. I agree with that.
Just because there was weird creatures and stuff that are also in it. It's like, oh, we're fighting over here. Oh, and actually,
so much going on in that fight. There was so much going on that battlefield. But I put it on par kind of with the Battle of Jeddah stuff. And it was, you know, like I said, it was brutal, you know, bounty hunters getting cut down by lightsabers and, you know, and the whole time they're just still in there like, let's do this. Can we speed this along? Can we hurry up?
I do.
I do. And you just skip to the good part, like, and then
it's like Pirates of the Caribbean.
Out the door. Yes, it has a very strong. Yes, it has a very strong Pirates of the Caribbean feel. Now that you say that, that's a perfect comparison. Between you talking about Keira Knightley and Orlando Bloom.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
On
that
the
is
ship
a perfect.
And
Yes,
he's like a little busy right now.
Oh, just gas. Yeah, that is the perfect comparison. I loved that scene. I had a blast reading that scene. And it was just another reason why that book was so hard for me to put down.
So the book ends with some really interesting beats. You have Axel going off to prison, and the mother contacts him in prison saying that she hasn't forgotten about him. She hasn't given up on him. And while Axel at this point in time is like, I'm kind of done with the path of the open hand, he cannot get Galen Natai's voice out of his head. He's in the end, his end words, his end thoughts in that book are like, I will purge her from my brain, from my thoughts at some point. And you just know he won't be able to. Like, you just know he won't be able to. Both of them left like an indelible mark on each other.
Right.
Just like Galen Natai completely changed her, you know, life as she thought it was going to go in the Order.
Yeah.
And she becomes a way seeker. And a way seeker at this time, Brian, you want to explain kind of the way seekers? We've done it before, just real quick. Like,
so the way seekers are Jedi that have decided to not so much work for the Jedi Council and for the Jedi Order, and kind of go off on their own and go where the Force wills them, where they feel the Force wills them to go, and not really have the authority of the Jedi Council over them. They still go help people, they go place to place, but they basically go where the Force leads them, instead of where the Jedi Council leads them.
And Qui-Gon probably would 100% have been a way seeker if they still did that, right?
If Qui-Gon had survived the Duel of the Fates, I guarantee he would have taken Anakin and just went off on his own to train him. I believe that full bore, which we can talk about what ifs all night long, but I swear that's you're right. That's out of all the Jedi we've seen outside of High Republic, Qui-Gon is probably the most likely to have done something like that. And especially had he survived and trained Anakin, I think he would have took him. But that's a conversation for another day.
Absolutely. I just thought that's a good way to
absolutely. Somebody who's
he is, or what a way seeker is, and kind of where Gella's at this point.
Yeah.
Because she was just she had this track that she wanted to go on with the Order. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate the fact that Axel had such an impact on her. She's like, no, I'm going to see this through. And originally her plan was to go to Jeddah to be a part of what the proceedings were going to be. They decided, Ziri and Fontu, they decided they needed a neutral place to sign this official peace treaty between their two planets. They have their marriage, and they needed a neutral place to sign the peace treaty. You know, they couldn't do it on one planet or the other. It would seem as if it was giving, you know, too much credence to that planet. And so they decided, let's pick a place that is prominent to lots of people from the galaxy, which is Jeddah, the holy city of Jeddah. And Gela was originally going to go there, but at this point, after what happened and transpired with Axel's kind of treachery, but also the two of their relationship, she said, I need to get as far away from this situation as possible. Right. Which, of course, when I saw the cover for Cataclysm, I was instantly like, well, that didn't go so well, I'm guessing.
It didn't last so long, yeah.
And so you have them going to Jeddah, Gela's going here, and then the deal with the poison. Let's wrap that up with the poison. I thought this perfectly encapsulated why Ziri and Vantu are perfect and together, and why they need to be together forever. And they are the perfect hope for Star Wars and the perfect hope for these planets. Vantu wants to destroy the poison. He goes to his parents. He's like, we need to destroy the facility and, you know, everything else. And they destroy the facility. They tell the Republic they've destroyed the facility, but there is a little bit of, you know, of it left. Yeah. And Vantu's like, we're going to destroy it. But Ziri's actually the one, even though it was going to be used against her people, she's the one that says, no, we need to keep this. There are other forces out there that are just like the Path, or just like these people that are going to try to tear our planets apart. We don't know if we could trust the Jedi in, you know, 10 years, 20 years. We don't know if we could trust the Republic in 10, 20, 30 years. We don't know who we can trust other than I trust Vantu and Vantu trusts me. And she says, we're going to keep that and be ready. And Vantu reluctantly agrees. And there was like a line in the book basically where Ziri says, like, we need to do that because of this. And Vantu says, okay, I agree. We can keep that, but we're not going to let that define us. We're not going to let those what ifs define us. We're still going to push forward to be the best version that we can be. And I just think that it's a beautiful balance between like the realist and the idealist. What about you?
No, I completely agree. And, you know, it still shows how different they are, but at the same time, they're still wanting to do what's best for both of their planets, not just their own planets, but for both. And I think it's a great comparison to, you know, like marriage in real life. You know, and no relationship is perfect. Nobody's going to agree on everything. And I think that's awesome. There's times my wife and I end up arguing. We don't see eye to eye on everything, but we figure it out, you know? And so I think that was a great way to kind of build that relationship a little bit more. And it's really good to see that they ended up, you know, they did end up falling in love, and that this, you're right. You just want to see them succeed and stay together forever and just conquer the galaxy, take on the whole galaxy and just win every time.
Right.
So, yeah.
It's just, I love Star Wars when it does not shy away from the romantic elements behind the galaxy. I think sometimes
if it's done right. Yeah.
I think since Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, I genuinely think that there has been a level of like timidness in whether it be shows or like live action shows or movies. Like in The Rise of Skywalker, we had the Rey bending, but it felt like we didn't want to go all in with that. You know, at the end, they threw the kiss in there. And obviously that's a matter of discord within Star Wars fans. I think some people feel like it was earned. Some people felt like that came out of nowhere. Regardless, I think we can all agree that it wasn't necessarily, they didn't go all in, you know, if they were going to go that route. And then, of course, in The Mandalorian, people have been wondering, are they skirting around that as well? And so obviously you have a little bit more freedom to do what you want in books a lot of times, because there's just a little bit more creative space there, just in terms of what you're allowed to do, especially in a High Republic setting. You can get away with a lot more. And so I really like the fact that they don't shy away from it. And they say, we're going to center our entire story around this romantic couple and these two romantic couples in a sense. And Cataclysm takes this story, which I think is a perfect story, and they amplify it and raise the stakes in a way that I did not think was possible for phase 2 after what we experienced in phase 3. And we barely talked about Creighton's son and I'm going to try to say it, Char Roy.
Char, good old Char.
Char and Enya Keen. But their story in Cataclysm
Yeah.
amplifies to the 10th degree to where you absolutely love these characters if you
Yeah.
didn't already. So Brian, final thoughts on Convergence. What did you, when you put the book down, what did you like finally say to yourself when you put the book down? Were there any beats that we missed that you want to cover real quick, or a character you just want to spend a few more minutes talking about?
Not necessarily. I really did enjoy that book quite a bit. I buzzed through it and just, well, I mean, I told you, I think we were doing, what were we doing? We were doing Star Wars Newsnet Live, and I told you I just started it that day, and I
Right.
had it finished. I mean, before we even recorded again, and I couldn't stop. It was so good, and you know, if I had any advice, like for anybody after finishing I just finished phase 2 of High Republic, like a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. If I have any
Time for
advice,
Eye of
is
Darkness, my
these.
friend.
I know. Well, I'm reading Rise of the Red Blade right now, and I love it. But I love Rise of the Red Blade. I can't wait to talk about that book. But I would say, you know, High Republic Phase 2, there's these, you know, young adult novels in between these two, you know, Path of Vengeance and Path of Deceit. Instead of reading everything chronologically, I would almost read these two back to back, the Convergence and the Cataclysm. Read them back to back, and then read the other two back to back. Path of
100%.
Path of Convergence. Was it
Path
Path
of
of
Vengeance.
Vengeance and then Path of Deceit? Read those back to back afterwards.
Right.
I those two, Cataclysm and Convergence, that is one massive story that is just split between two books, basically. And
I agree.
it's so awesome. Like you said, with, you know, the Jedi, they had such a, I don't want to say a minimal role in Convergence, but they were supporting, they were, you know, side characters, become main characters in the second book. And it's
The
wild. This
real
whole,
only main character
so
is
good.
Gilla in Convergence. Like a real main character that's a Jedi is Gilla.
Yeah.
And it actually serves the book quite well, which is something we haven't seen from a lot of High Republic. It's mostly Jedi centric outside of maybe the vessel crew and a few other characters. And it was it is not easy to pull off what Zoraida Cordova pulled off.
Yeah.
It is not in Star Wars.
No.
Because what she did, and what I said at the beginning of the show, she took the best beats from Star Wars, which is hope for family, hope for love, hope for a future. She took all of those beats, took the best qualities of all of those, and wove it into a single thread, a single story that has familiarity to it, but completely stands out as fresh. And that is not easy to do.
Right.
Can't say enough about this book. Brian, you want to give us a little sneak peek at where we are going to venture off to next in this
I was
phase
just
of
pulling it
the
up.
High Republic?
I was just pulling it up. Next week, we're going to be talking about a young adult book, our young reader by George Mann, called Quest for the Hidden City. This is actually one of my favorite young reader. Now, is it a young reader, or it'd be young
It's
reader? No.
It's like the middle grade.
Yeah, it's
Which
actually
I have a confession.
You haven't read it.
I'm reading it this week.
Okay, I was gonna say, because I really enjoyed it. It was actually one of my favorite ones out of all that.
It's honestly like the only High Republic thing from this phase I think I haven't read. I'll have to like double check that, but it's one I have not gotten to.
It's so, but just to give you,
middle grades are so easy to whip through. Like I'll probably finish it in
you can read them in just a few hours. Yeah. But just as a quick like little snippet of something we're going to be talking about. I'm not going to try to give away any spoilers for the book, but I really enjoyed it. There's, you know, they land on there's a planet. I'll just say this much, because this is an awesome thing that I thought was really cool. There's a planet that has basically zombie bats on it, and they're zombies because they have this mineral, this sentient mineral growing inside of them that just wants to reproduce. It is so fun to read. Like whenever one gets hit with a lightsaber, they just fall apart and all the minerals come flying out of them, like all the rocks come out. It sounds stupid, but I promise you it is done so cool. It is so cool to read. So it's terrifying. There's parts of that book that are actually terrifying to read.
I'm excited.
It's really cool.
Yes, I'll be diving into it probably just this weekend. I'll try to crank it out a little bit. It's the Super Bowl this weekend, so it's a busy time for those of us who partake. But That was
yeah,
fun. That was fun.
Yeah, we're gonna be talking about that
Excited.
next week. So at the start of the show next week, I would like to start seeing what your guys' comments are on the one we talked about this week. So wherever you're listening to this podcast, whether it be on Spotify, on YouTube, wherever you guys are watching this at or listening to it,
We'll
if you're
have it on
listening on,
Apple this week, right?
I believe so. I'm working on it. I'm
Mhm.
trying to get us on Apple Podcasts right now, also. So I got to get with Val on that, but we are. If you're listening on Spotify, scroll on down a little bit, and there's going to be a Q&A section. And you can give us your thoughts right there. But what did you guys think of Convergence? If you've read it, you can go full spoilers. That's fine. And before we get into
And if
Quest
you
for the Hidden
haven't read
City
it,
next week,
is there any comments on the book just from our brief discussion or further questions you'd like us to dive deeper on? Like we can always, really quick hit on something
yeah.
else too.
And also, if you have any questions for Quest for the Hidden City, drop them and we'll address them next week also.
And it'll be fresh. It'll be fresh on my mind.
Yes. I love that book. That was such a fun book to read. It really was.
Well,
it was so much fun.
I'm looking forward to having some fun. For Light and Life, this has been another episode of the Star Wars News Net, the Timeline Show.